The following program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.
Thank you all so much for being here. My name is Jennifer, and I'm the organizer in Henniker. Thank you. I know we're all really excited to hear Pete Buttigieg, but before we do, I just want to say a few quick words about why it is so important to get involved and what you can do to help make sure Pete becomes the next president of the United States. So, 1 year ago, I was sitting through an inorganic chemistry lecture, and I felt hopeless. With all the mathematical problems laid out on the chalkboard before me, there was one major problem of divisiveness. And I felt hopeless because I was sitting behind a desk, unable to help mend the fragmented world I was about to enter upon graduating. And then came Pete Buttigieg. Pete often talks about creating a new era. And this is important because the wounds we incur today could affect us for generations to come. But we have the power to come together now and share and shape our new era. Pete's plan to unite the nation to create this positive change gives me hope. And that is why I'm here in New Hampshire, where we have the power to elect the person who will lead us in creating our best future. So here's what you can do to help build that future. Please sign a commit to vote card and commit to voting for Pete Buttigieg. Once you sign the card, our organizers will reach out and tell you more about exactly what you can do to help make sure Pete becomes the next president. And we have organizers and volunteers all around. They have clipboards, and so you can find them and sign up your name there. So can we count on you to help us win the era? Thank you, Henniker. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Noah Bond, a student here at New England College.
Thank you. Good morning. Welcome to New England College. My name is Noah Bond. I am a senior political science major here at NEC. Today, on behalf of the students, staff, and faculty, it is my pleasure to introduce our guest, presidential candidate Pete Buttigieg, the mayor of South Bend, Indiana. Like many other Americans in the industrial Midwest, Pete grew up in South Bend surrounded by empty factories and abandoned houses. After graduating college and working in the private sector, Pete returned to serve his hometown after it had been devastated by the Great Recession. In 2011, Pete was elected mayor of South Bend on a promise to bring the city back with a new approach to politics and new ideas. The year he took office, Newsweek wrote off South Bend as one of America's 10 dying cities. As mayor, Pete worked across the aisle to transform South Bend and improve people's lives. Household income rose by 31%, poverty fell by a third, and unemployment was cut in half. At the time, Pete worked to build a South Bend community where every resident could feel safe and included. And during his first term, Pete was deployed to Afghanistan as a lieutenant in the Navy. There, he saw firsthand that when you bring Americans from different backgrounds together in common purpose, you can build the strongest fighting force the world has ever seen. And that is exactly what we need now. Pete knows answers won't come from Washington, but rather to Washington. As a mayor, he knows good politics is based in helping people, not in advancing an ideological agenda. As a veteran, he understands when we bring Americans together, we can do anything. And as president, Pete will bring a new kind of politics to Washington, one that will rally Americans together behind bold ideas so we can finally solve our greatest problems. Today, Mayor Pete will lead this town hall. He will share his ideas and he will answer our questions. I think you will find him a serious, thoughtful, and reasonable voice in a time where those three attributes are so desperately needed. Please join me in welcoming Mayor Pete Buttigieg. So on behalf of the college, we'd like to thank Mayor Pete for being here today with this sweatshirt. Hey, awesome to meet you.
Same here. Thanks a lot. Well, thank you. Thanks for the sweatshirt, too. It's getting a little chilly up here. Makes me feel right at home. And I'm so thankful for the opportunity to spend time with you and to talk about where the future of our country is headed. So much is on the stake now, at stake now. And one thing I've come to really admire in New Hampshire is the awareness among folks here that that thumb on the scale that you have in presidential politics is a responsibility that is taken very seriously. And I'm very appreciative of this chance to invite you to kick the tires on some of the ideas and the vision that I'm offering for this country. I want to begin by asking you to picture, as specifically as you can, a day that is going to come in the not too distant future, one way or the other, in our country. And it's the day that the sun comes up over our country and Donald Trump is no longer the president of the United States. Just want to ask you to build that image. I think we're all ready for that day to come as soon as possible. Put the chaos behind us, put the corruption behind us, not wake up every morning wondering what tweet emanated from the White House. But the reason I'm asking you to picture that day is not only to remind us that we got something to look forward to, but also to ask you to think about what America is going to need on that day, what we're going to require of our next president. Because by definition, this election is a competition not only for who can bring an end to the Trump era, but who can lead us into the era that must come next. And that era will begin with the sun coming up over a country that will be even more divided than it is today, even more polarized. You just think about everything we've been through and everything we are about to go through. We will be even more torn up over politics and exhausted from fighting than we are right now. That will be true, and something else will be true at the same time, which is that the issues, the crises that have gotten us to this point as a country will still be there. They're not taking a vacation for the impeachment process. They haven't taken any time off for the Trump presidency. Sun's going to come up in a climate that is a few years away from a point of no return, leading us to catastrophe around the world and in this country. Sun will come up over a nation where kids are now learning active shooter drills before they learn how to read. And an economy where, the stock market's going up, but more and more Americans find they have to fight just to hold on to what they've got. And we are actually now living on average shorter lives in this country. These are the problems that are going to be at the feet of the next president. And so the challenge will be to implement big enough, bold enough ideas to meet that moment and to figure out a way to do it that can unify a dangerously divided American people. That is the kind of president that I am running to be. Someone who can help the country gather up the pieces on that day and launch a new era that is characterized by an American experience, not of exclusion, but of belonging. And while it's certainly a tall order to ask of the next president, I see what it will take in order to deliver that. And it all begins with American values. Values that are with us that don't belong to a single party, but I would argue, if you take them seriously, take you in a pretty progressive direction. I've been thinking a lot about the value of patriotism, of love of country. The values that motivated the folks I served with. But when I say that, I'm not talking about the cheap nationalism of hugging the flag, literally. Or a president going around basically reducing America to just one more country out there scrapping for advantage, alienating allies right and left, and here at home telling people to go back to where they came from, even when they're American citizens. That is not what I mean when I'm talking about patriotism. I'm talking about a love of country that begins with the understanding that our country is made of people. And you cannot love a country if you hate half of the people in it. So what does it really mean to protect our country? Well, first of all, it means protecting the reputation of our country. And it hurts as an American to see the American president being laughed at, both behind his back and to his face, by the leaders of the world. That makes this whole country worse off. But it also means doing the right thing right here at home. See, protecting our country means protecting each other. That is why it is so important to find the courage to see to it that the Second Amendment can no longer be confused for being an excuse to do nothing whatsoever when it comes to gun violence, when we know that things like background checks will save thousands of lives a year in our country. And protecting our country means protecting the future. That is why it is imperative to act on climate change before it's too late and lead those world leaders in joining us to do it, because we've got to do this as a global partnership. That's protecting our country. That's what it means, in my view, to honor that value. These values that they're pitting us against each other that could be used to unite us. Thinking a lot about faith. Now, my party doesn't always talk about faith, and it's for a very good reason, which is that we are strongly committed to the belief and the principle that this country and its constitution and its elected officials belong to people of every religion and of no religion equally. That is a founding principle of the United States. At the same time, I think there are a lot of folks, fellow Americans, who are waking up today to the news that this administration is once again working to cut food going to needy and hungry families and thinking about the words, "I was hungry and you did not feed me." So how about a different understanding of what moral leadership means, no matter what faith tradition you belong to? I believe that we need to use that to bring Americans together too. I'm thinking about democracy, not as a system, but as a value. The belief that there is moral weight to making sure that every voter counts and that every vote is counted. That's why it is imperative to put an end to voter suppression, whether it is the racial voter suppression that is why Stacey Abrams is not the governor in Georgia right now, or the suppression of the student vote right here in New Hampshire. That is undemocratic, and it's a question of values. It's why, in the name of the value of democracy, we have got to act to move past districts being drawn by politicians picking out their voters before the election happens, and citizens united distorting what it means to be a democracy. And if the only way to clear up that role of money in politics is with constitutional reform, then I believe that is exactly what the founders had in mind when they made it possible for us to amend our Constitution. So let's act. And I think, especially in New Hampshire, it's good to talk about that core American value of freedom, and to rescue that value from a vision that would shrink it down to imagining that all you got to do to make us free is to cut every regulation and tax you've ever seen. I'm not terribly interested with preserving Amazon's freedom to not have to pay any federal income taxes at all. That's not my idea of American freedom. I'm talking about positive freedom, the freedom to live a life of your choosing. Sometimes that does mean getting government out of the way, no question. For example, I believe freedom is at stake in the importance of getting government out of the business of dictating to women what their reproductive health care choices ought to be. But then sometimes delivering freedom means insisting that the public sector step up. We certainly understand this at the local level. Every mayor knows that we're expected to deliver on what it takes to make people free by tearing down barriers. Just making sure that the road is plowed helps deliver freedom. So does making sure we have good schools, which is why we need a Secretary of Education in Washington who believes in public education and supports teachers. And I believe at a national level, it also requires that we step up and insist that every American get health coverage one way or the other. That's the idea of Medicare for all who want it. We make Medicare available to everybody who wants it because you're not free if you don't have health care. We also respect your freedom to decide whether you want it, because one way or the other, you ought to be able to get coverage, but I'm not going to dictate to you the terms of that coverage. That's what it means to solve the problem and honor the value of American freedom at the same time. So you see how these values can point the way toward serious, determined action, but we can also do it in a way that can cultivate and galvanize an American majority that is ready to go on these issues, that more than even 10 years ago is with us on the need to solve these crises, that is insisting that we deliver paid family leave and a higher minimum wage, that recognizes the imperative of tackling mental health and addiction with just as much urgency and openness as we do physical health challenges. A majority that sees why we must bring an end to systemic racial inequality in this country in our time, or it will drag down the entire American project. And yes, that means putting resources into that. An American majority that knows that we have got to come together and do something about long-term care, including preserving Social Security that is time and time again put on the chopping block when all we've got to do is make sure everybody's paying their fair share, and Social Security will be in great shape, certainly to the time that I'll be expecting to draw on it and beyond. These are the steps that the American people expect us to take if we can just cut through the noise. And that's why you'll notice that while I do not hesitate to confront this president when he does something wrong, I'm not going to allow him to change the subject of this election to him, because the subject of this election is you. It's us, and it's the way the decisions they make in those big white buildings in Washington, D.C. affect our everyday lives, come into our homes and our workplaces and our communities, our neighborhoods, and even our marriages. That's what politics and government is and ought to be about. And that's what I'm about. And I am propelled by a sense of hope that may be a little bit unfashionable right now because of all the bleakness that we've gone through in our politics that makes folks wonder where hope is to be found. But you need to have it in order to run for office. And my hope is animated by what I have seen in my lifetime. Seeing a community, my community, with off-the-charts rates of unemployment and poverty at the beginning of this same decade we're living in, work side by side to solve problems, not making them all go away, but making unbelievable progress and standing on its feet again. It's the hope of having found common ground with fellow Americans of radically different values when we were deployed overseas, knowing that we had to find a way to trust each other with our lives. And it's the hope of somebody whose marriage exists by the grace of a single vote on the United States Supreme Court. I know what is possible if we insist on a future that's better than the past, and that's what this campaign is about. So I'm thankful for the chance to have this conversation. And having given you a feel for what this campaign is about, I'll cut the monologue and look forward to a discussion. I think we got some mics that'll be making their way to you, so just stick up your hand and wait for the mic. Yes, sir.
First of all, thank you for your service to our country as a fellow veteran.
Thank you. And thanks for yours.
Thank you. I'm a scientist and a grandfather, and you mentioned climate change. And what really bothers me is that most Americans don't understand how serious it is, and they don't understand that the fossil fuel industry has known about this, but not done anything. In fact, they've spent money to confuse people, which is meaning that we're not addressing it in time. If you're elected president, will you inform Americans as to why we need to act and hold the fossil fuel industry accountable?
Yes and yes. Time is up, and the jury's in. We know what we're up against. There's no more debating. The train has left the station on debating whether this is real. In my city, my river city in northern Indiana, we had a flood that's supposed to be the kind of flood that happens every 1,000 years or so. And I had to get the 3 a.m. call, activate the emergency operations protocol, and deal with that once in a millennium flood. And then we had another one less than 2 years later. This is upon us. And it is costing lives, and it is costing treasure, and this is just the beginning. The good news is, not only is it not too late to act, but I think this comes at just the right moment. The American people always do better when we have a national project on our hands. And here's a national project that doesn't involve just fighting other people. So I think this is a pretty good moment for us to marshal the resources of this country and get something done. And there's a whole set of concrete actions we got to take in order to make it happen, from a carbon fee and dividend to investing in renewable energy to making sure that we unlock the potential of local government and local decision making. And by the way, agriculture, that could be a huge part of the solution because of what plants can do to take carbon out of the air. But more than all of those individual policies we got to do, and leading the world with global climate diplomacy, which by the way is one of the ways we might elevate our moral stock among the leaders of the world. But is also to summon the whole country to be part of that effort and come together around that project. So it will be a top priority when I am president. Thank you. Yes. Hi. All right.
Since college.
Terrific. We'll still claim you. Where are you from?
Since graduating from Purdue.
From Purdue.
I'm
okay.
from the Lafayette,
Great.
Delphi,
Great.
Indiana.
Yeah.
And my sister's in South Bend, and she told me about you.
Oh, good. Hopefully
A
she
few
had
years
good
ago,
things
and
to
said
say.
he's an up and rising star. Watch
good.
for him. Anyway, my question is regarding public financing of elections and taking the money out of our government. And can we really achieve what we need to achieve without structural change and move to public funded elections?
Great. So I think we do need a public financing mechanism. We need to do that in order to empower the American people to make decisions. I think in particular ideas that center on an allocation that people can control makes a lot of sense. At the same time, I am worried that no matter what, without more fundamental reforms, there is always the risk of public money being drowned out by enormous private fortunes, corporate dark money, super PACs, and so on. And that's why, while there are a number of things we can do in the short run, I mean, think about H.R. 1. The bill, this was a pro-democracy, anti-corruption bill. It passed the U.S. House. And it's one of many, many pieces of good legislation to pass the House, go to Mitch McConnell's Senate, and die there. But that included provisions that would help with transparency and dealing with dark money. But fundamentally, if this court is going to hold, as it has with Citizens United, that a corporation's got the same political soul as a human being, and that money is the same thing as speech, then I believe we also need to get to work on constitutional reform. And if it's precisely because I know how long that will take and how hard it will be that I think we got to start that work right now. Now, some folks think that's far out. That's too ambitious of a structural reform. Let's remember that up until lately, we had the muscle memory as a country to undertake these reforms. It was as recently as the 70s, 60s and 70s, that the senator from Indiana, Birch Bayh, not a wild-eyed radical, was helping lead things like changing the voting age to 18 and the 25th Amendment. Even the ERA, which I have not given up on, but even having that fight helped lead to Title IX. So in a country that changed its constitution so you couldn't buy a beer, and then changed our mind and changed the Constitution back, I refuse to accept the idea that it's beyond the power of the American people to undertake reforms at that level to clear up the difference between a corporation spending money to influence an election and a human being speaking out about their values in the political square. Yes, sir.
I'm a college student from the University of Vermont. Thanks. So you're a mayor, and we've never seen a mayor jump from that office to President of the United States. So I'm wondering, what about that position makes you uniquely qualified or qualified differently from your other competitors for this office?
Yeah, so first of all, when you're a mayor, you are responsible for getting things done. You don't get to, you'll never hear about a city shutting down the government because they have a disagreement over politics. You can't. We deliver water and you need water to live, so you just get it done. Cities don't get to print their own money when there's a deficit, so you just have to figure out your finances and get stuff done. You have to work across the aisle, especially when you're a Democratic mayor in a place like Indiana. I'm on my third Republican governor, and we haven't agreed on many things, but we found ways to work with each of them. And that is the kind of problem-solving experience I think we need a little more of in Washington. Another thing is, while you are the leader of a community, you're on television every day, and you have that experience of being an executive authority, in a community like mine, your feet are also very much on the ground. You get your own groceries, you drive your own car, and you don't get disconnected from the fundamental reality of your neighbors. You eat what you cook when you're making those decisions at the local level. And again, I think that's the kind of orientation we need in a place like Washington that gets so carried away in its own internal battles. The other thing I would say is that when you're a mayor, you learn that your job is not only policy. That's what legislators work on the most, right? Crafting good policy. That's part of it. A lot of it's management, running an administration, balancing and managing budgets. But there's something even bigger than that, which is the symbolic, unwritten role of being the leader of a population of any size. And what you realize there is, even or especially for people who don't agree with you on party or policy, you still serve them. And you are a walking reminder to people from different walks of life in the city who might have nothing in common with each other than that you are their mayor, other than they belong to the same city. That's what we're missing most in the presidency right now. In addition to the policy mistakes, in addition to the administrative mismanagement, I think what's costing us most right now is a president who doesn't understand that his function is to let all of us, even those who disagree with him, know that we belong to the same country. And creating that sense of belonging is a huge part of what the presidency is for and how I aim to use the office of the presidency, in addition to its constitutional powers, to heal as well as advance the people of the United States. Okay. Make sure I get this side. Yes. Actually, yeah, go ahead. I was tempted to, I'm going to save you for last. Is that okay? All right. So get ready.
When I was in the Army, it was during a period where we had a draft in this country, which wasn't necessarily very popular, but one of the features of a draft is that it's a tremendous mixing mechanism for those people who were serving, all brought together across society. Do you have any visions or any ideas for what can serve that function?
Yes.
Going forward?
I'm so glad you raised that, because it's important that we have things, especially in our splintered, siloed, echo chambery kind of reality right now, that we have some things in common. And military service was that for generations. It's where a young John F. Kennedy met and perhaps took orders from the son of a farmer in Indiana. And one of the things I experienced in the military was finding myself side by side with people who had radically different life experiences and sometimes values than I did, and finding that common cause. Now, the military is not for everybody, but one of the reasons I believe so much in the power of service is having seen that and wanting everybody to have that kind of bond without having to go to war in order to get it. And it's why I'm proposing that we create 1 million paid, voluntary, civilian national service opportunities a year, so that it becomes a norm for everybody to serve. And there's no shortage of work to do. I'm proposing a climate corps that would help with projects involved in making our communities more resilient. I'm proposing a community health corps that can help with getting ahead of issues like addiction and mental health, and whatever communities themselves decide is most important. But what we know is, in addition to the good work they can do, the experience of doing that work matters too. And it brings people together, and for the rest of their lives, there can be that question, what did you do during your service? And I want to create that opportunity. And even in a voluntary program, I believe we can make it such a norm, especially because it's paid. So it's not a privilege to serve. That everyone can, whether they're going to college or whether they're going to the workforce, can have that experience. We also just need more shared things in general. This is another part of what's at stake in the debate about schools. The role of community schools that really needs to be lifted up is that when you have excellent public education in a community, it becomes a touchstone that people have in common. Not just the building, but the community that is built around the school becomes something that people from different backgrounds can have and hold in common. And in our schools, in our communities, in our policies, and in our service, we need to do everything we can to build a single shared experience through all the diversity and variety of living in America, in order for us to, if we don't have the same opinions, at least live in a world governed by the same facts. Thank you. Yes, in the back.
So in January, New England College, we're hosting something called College Convention, which brings colleges from around the nation to Manchester. And we were wondering if you would be showing up at College Convention this year with us.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks for the invitation. I hope I get the opportunity. I'm not entirely sure what I'll be doing the day after tomorrow, but we will make sure, I'll make sure to ask if we receive the invitation and see if we can't participate. And thanks a lot for the chance to join. Thank you. Yes.
Hi. Thank you for your service.
Thanks.
I have a question about the terrible Trump tax cuts. I'm self-employed, and when I had my taxes done this last cycle, the accountant said, oh, great, you're paying $5,000 less than any of the 3 years prior. Congrats. My initial feeling was anxiety. And my question is, how long is it going to take for my children to pay off my debt? I could have very easily written a check for that $5,000 and still been okay for the whole year. So I'm really concerned about their future. Climate, the community service we're talking about, all of it, but why should they be responsible for my debt?
It's a great question. Like climate, fiscal policy can be a question of intergenerational justice. And I know that my party's not known for worrying about deficits and the debt too much, but it's time for us to start getting into that business. Because what we've seen in Washington is that the party that talked a lot about the deficit when they were trying to kill off programs, when it came time for this corporate tax cut, turns out they don't care. There is $1 trillion deficit now, and created under a Republican administration. Which means if my party doesn't start getting interested in deficits and debt, nobody will. And I view it the same way you do, as a generational question, because I think we may not have to wait for kids and grandkids to see when those fiscal time bombs start to go off. Now, the good news is we can fund the things we need to do as a country without returning to even Eisenhower-level taxation. Although, for the record, the economy grew just fine under Eisenhower. But with reasonable measures to make sure that, first of all, multinational corporations pay more than, they literally paid less than you and I did last year. But also making sure that we ask those who are best off to pay their fair share. And one thing you'll notice in my campaign, if you dig into our policy proposals, is that everything we propose, and some of it's not cheap, but everything we propose is a promise we know we can keep. It's why, when it comes to college, I'm making sure that we support college tuition for those who would benefit from it the most, but maybe not subsidize the children of millionaires and billionaires. It's why we found a way to solve the healthcare issue that does not have a 30, 40, or $50 trillion bill. But for the things we are proposing, which do cost money, we're always going to explain how to pay for it too. So that the sum total of everything that my campaign says we ought to do around education, infrastructure, health, you name it, is paid for. And the deficit will, at worst, stay the same, and at best, we will work to reduce it. Because I think it is important. It is time for us to come to terms with it, and it's become abundantly clear that if we don't, nobody will. Thank you. All right. Yes, sir.
Oh, hey, I know it was about a year ago you adopted Buddy, your special needs dog. And I want to know, how does adopting a special needs dog help make you more empathetic to those who are less fortunate than maybe some of us are?
Well, first of all, thanks for acknowledging Buddy. Buddy's a very important part of our lives now. His adoption anniversary was a couple days ago. Buddy's wonderful. He's a puggle. He came to us 4 or 5 years old. His previous owners, I think, loved him with food, so he's on a weight loss journey. He's down one eye, but that doesn't stop him. And Truman, our other rescue dog, the two of them get along pretty well. And look, it's not like I'm going to claim that adopting rescue dogs makes me a better person or anything like that. I will say it probably makes Chasten a better person because he does most of the work when it comes to feeding and looking after them. And I'll say having creatures in your life who don't know or care that you're running for president is a healthy thing in a heady time. I will say that we're at a moment where we got to just back up and ask how we're treating one another, animal, human, and otherwise. We got to ask how we're treating ourselves right now, because as a country, and I think individually, we're in trouble. The reason that life expectancy is falling in the United States right now is mostly because of deaths from despair. This begins often with folks self-medicating and ends with a deadly addiction. And if current trends continue, cutting deaths from despair in half would mean saving 1 million lives over the course of the next decade. So we know what we're up against, not just policy-wise, but as a country, just deep down. And I know that sounds a little less concrete than the policy things we've been talking about, but I am convinced that a really important part of what's at stake in the American presidency is the ability to establish that sense of belonging that lets everybody who right now, everybody for different reasons, based on your politics or your economic status or your race or your religion or disability or who you are, in so many different ways, people are being told you don't belong. And my message is, yes, you do. Everyone belongs in this American project together, and we can't pull it off without each other. And that is a big part of what's at stake in this campaign and in this election. And we will work to cultivate that sense of belonging every day of this campaign and every minute of my presidency.
Okay, this is going to be the last question.
Last question? All right. I promised you you'd get the last word, so the microphone will come to you.
Mine?
All right.
Should I stand up?
Yeah, go ahead and stand up. Wonderful.
So, Mayor Buttigieg, I have listened to you in the debates and learned some stuff about you, and that you have and that you believe in a woman's right to choose about her own body. I agree with that, and no one should mess with or choose about my body except me and my parents, because I'm still a child.
You sound pretty sophisticated for a child. Do you mind if I ask how old you are?
I don't mind.
Well, how old are you?
7.
Really? Well, you're ahead of your time. I'm sorry to interrupt. Go ahead and continue your question if you'd like.
I believe that you make your decision on whether you're going to have a child, and then your decision is made, and the abortion is not part of it. What do you think about that?
Well, first of all, thanks for speaking up about this, and thanks for being here. And I wish I was as tuned in to big issues when I was 7 as you seem to be. This is a hard issue for a lot of people because they believe different things. And where I live, people believe different things, including people that I respect. But the way I think about it is that this choice, it's about drawing a line. And we might each, following our own beliefs, have a different idea about where to draw the line. What I hope everybody, or at least most of us, can agree on is who gets to draw the line. And that's the person making the decision. That's the woman in question. And I trust women to make that choice. I don't think that choice is easy. I know that it's not going to be any better because the government's saying what it ought to be. I trust women to make that choice. And it sounds like you and I view this issue the same way. Well, I want to thank you for being part of this. You're going to continue to see an awful lot of us here in New Hampshire in the weeks and months ahead. I hope that you'll take some time to get to know our fantastic organizing team on the ground, as well as hopefully have more chances to interact directly in person too. I just want to close with this. I really am propelled, even in this bleak moment, by the belief that we're going to be able to look back with pride on 2020. That we'll be able to say, by the time 30 years from now, when you're my age, and tuning into the news, that we'll be able to say, well, look at what we did in 2020. Yeah, it was rough as of 2019, but look at what we did in 2020. to make sure that the climate didn't get in the way of your chances at having a good life, to make sure that when the economy grew, it actually benefited everybody, to set ourselves on a path toward becoming a country where your race has nothing to do with your health or your wealth or your relationship with law enforcement in the United States of America, to set up a future where kids aren't afraid of going to school because of gun violence. That's all up to us right now. And we could be so proud of what we did to make it happen if we take the right steps, support each other, and galvanize, not polarize, the American majority ready to support us as we do. That is why I'm running for president. It's why I'm asking for your vote. I hope that I've earned your support, and I look forward to seeing you on the trail. Thanks so much for the chance to be with you.
The preceding program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.